Creativity is one of those things that people talk about like it's magic. Like some people are born with fairy dust sprinkled on their brains and the rest of us are here just paying tax and hoping for the best. But the truth is way more interesting. Creativity isn't magic, it's mechanics. It's your brain connecting ideas that don't normally sit together, and the science behind how that happens is genuinely mind-blowing. Welcome to the series where we have you get 1% smarter with every video. Let's talk about creativity. The first thing you need to know is this. Your brain is constantly combining ideas in the background even when you think you're doing nothing. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, which I've spoken about before in one of my shorts, which you should totally check out, by the way. This is just a fancy term for the brain system that fires up when you're daydreaming, showering, or staring out of a window. This network lights up like a Christmas tree whenever your mind wanders. And studies show it's during these unfocused states that your brain makes its most original connections. This is why your best ideas show up when you're shampooing your hair or walking to the shop, not when you're aggressively typing with caffeine sweats at 11 p.m. Creativity needs looseness, it needs mental space, and most importantly, it needs boredom. And yes, I know that sounds ironic in a world that's obsessed with productivity, but boredom is where your brain finally gets the room to breathe. Let's look at the story of Archimedes. The guy literally solved a physics problem that stumped him for weeks, not at a desk, but while relaxing in a bath. And Paul McCartney, the singer, famously dreamt the melody for Yesterday in his sleep. And what about Einstein? We all know about him. He said he's got some of his biggest breakthroughs while practicing his violin. The commonality between all these events was that they weren't accidents, they were mental breaks. When your brain stops obsessively focusing on a single problem, it suddenly has bandwidth to link a random memory, fact, emotion, and experience into something new. And that's all creativity is, the collision of ideas that weren't colliding before. The brain needs those unfocused moments, the quiet between tasks, the stroll between meetings, the shower where you forgot what day it is, because those are the moments when the default mode network switches on and starts connecting dots you didn't even realize belonged together. But here's a mistake that most people make when it comes to creativity. They think creativity is about inspiration, when really it's about input. Your brain can only combine the ingredients you have given it. If all you consume is the same content everyone else consumes, and you think the same thoughts everyone else thinks, you can't expect your brain to magically serve you Michelin-star ideas. This is essentially like trying to cook a gourmet meal with a jar of mayonnaise and just pure vibes. Real creativity comes from feeding your brain diverse inputs, stories, experiences, skills, mistakes, perspectives that don't normally overlap. The more variety you expose yourself to, the more raw material your brain has to work with when it starts making unexpected connections. Another example of this is the story of Steve Jobs. When he dropped out of college, he started sitting in on random classes, including a calligraphy course that had absolutely nothing to do with technology. Years later, that random detour became the inspiration for the first Mac's typography, the reason computers even have beautiful fonts today. That's how creativity works. A skill that seems useless in the moment becomes the crucial piece of the puzzle that you need later on. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where divergent thinking comes in. Divergent thinking is the ability to generate lots of different ideas instead of just one. It's not about finding the correct answer. It's about finding 10 weird ones and then spotting which one might secretly be brilliant. Psychologist J.P. Guilford popularized this idea in the 1950s, and modern research backs it up. The more alternatives your brain can produce, the more likely it is to stumble into something original. Creativity rewards range. It rewards the person who pulls from different shelves in their mental library instead of rereading the same book forever. But here's the twist. Divergent thinking isn't a personality trait. It's a trainable skill. The brain literally improves its ability to connect distant ideas the more you practice it, like going to the gym but without existential dread of leg day. The neural pathways involved in creative thinking get stronger, faster, and more flexible the more you engage them. And yes, daydreaming is one of the training methods. Most people were taught that daydreaming is a distraction, something you grow out of or get scolded for. But research from the University of California shows that people who let their mind wander intentionally perform significantly better on creative problem-solving tasks. Daydreaming is your brain testing combinations, exploring possibilities, running simulations without your permission. Now, I should say the key word there is intentionally daydreaming, because daydreaming about being a pirate in Pirates of the Caribbean and rescuing a princess of some sorts does not count. So the question isn't, are you creative? The question is, are you giving your brain the right conditions to be creative? And that brings us to the million-dollar question. How do you actually train your brain to be more creative? Spoiler alert, it's not daydreaming about being a pirate. One of the most powerful ways to sharpen creativity is to deliberately expose yourself to things outside your normal world. Creativity thrives on contrast. If all your inputs come from the same industry, the same routines, the same 5 people you follow online, you're basically feeding your brain leftovers and hoping it produces a 5-course meal. But the moment you introduce something unexpected, a new hobby, a documentary you'd never normally watch, a conversation with someone who thinks differently, the brain starts building new neural connections. Suddenly, ideas that were previously impossible to link begin snapping together like magnets. This is why the world's most creative people have unrelated, weird interests. Steve Jobs studied calligraphy before building computers. Childish Gambino mixes writing, acting, directing, and music. Even Einstein played the violin and swore it helped him solve physics problems. So the key here is that they weren't randomly talented. They were cross-pollinating their brains and giving it more ingredients to cook with. But here's something even more interesting. Creativity improves when you stop trying to be creative. There's a study from the University of British Columbia showing that mild distractions actually boost creative output. Why? Because they push the brain out of a linear thinking pattern and into exploration mode. When you're too focused, you think predictably. When you focus loosens, your brain wanders just enough to explore new paths. Your brain loves operating in the background. It just needs you to get out of the way. But wait, there's another layer, and this one's important. Creativity requires safety. Your brain simply won't take risks if it believes the cost of being wrong is too high. This is why children are creatively fearless and adults are creatively anxious. Kids don't care if an idea is stupid. They'll tell you a dragon lives in their wardrobe and powers the Wi-Fi, and they'll say it with confidence. Adults, on the other hand, have been trained to avoid embarrassment like it's a live grenade. And you see this play out in the real world. Look at Pixar. Their teams openly talk about how their best films started out as ugly babies. Rough, messy, borderline terrible ideas that only survived because the environment allowed them to. Inside Pixar, pitching something half-baked isn't a career-ending risk. It's part of the process. That psychological safety is a reason a film like Inside Out, which originally sounded bizarre and unmarketable, like, let's be honest, a movie about emotions that live inside your head, became one of the most creative animated films ever made. The point is, every breakthrough idea starts off by sounding utterly ridiculous. But that's the price of originality. So part of training creativity is lowering the stakes. You need to create environments where bad ideas are allowed to exist, because bad ideas are often just early stage good ideas wearing the wrong outfit. That probably explains my terrible fashion sense. Anyway, the real unlock is this. Creativity compounds. The more ideas you generate, the more your brain learns to generate. The more connections you make, the faster your brain becomes at making them. There's actual neural evidence for this. Repeated creative problem solving strengthens the associative regions of the brain, making them more efficient and more likely to activate spontaneously. In other words, creativity isn't lightning, it's a muscle. And the moment you treat it like a muscle, something you stretch, challenge, and train, everything changes. You stop waiting for inspiration and start creating conditions where inspiration can't help but show up. So now that we've exposed how the brain connects random ideas, why daydreaming occurs, and how divergent thinking works behind the scenes, the real question becomes, how do we turn this into a repeatable system? The first shift is recognizing that creativity isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about creating the conditions where your brain has no choice but to generate ideas. And one of the simplest ways to do this is changing your environment. A different room, a walk outside, a new route home. Even switching from typing to handwriting completely changes the neural patterns your brain relies on. There's research from Stanford showing that walking boosts creative output by 60%. Movement literally shakes new ideas loose. But it's not just where you think, it's how you think. One of the most powerful methods is something that psychologists call conceptual blending. This is essentially taking two unrelated ideas and forcing your brain to find a bridge between them. This is literally the backbone of jokes, inventions, metaphors, and some of the most disruptive business ideas of the last century. Airbnb is hotels meets spare bedrooms. Uber is taxi meets your phone's GPS. TikTok is music meets micro entertainment meets an algorithm that knows you better than your mates. These weren't random sparks of genius. They were ideas that combined. And the more you practice combining these unusual ideas, the more your brain produces them. That's why creators, writers, entrepreneurs, and artists often describe creativity as something that starts to flow. It's not mystical, it's neural efficiency. But none of this works if your brain is constantly overloaded. Creativity needs space, and in a world where every spare second gets filled with screens, pings, and notifications, your mind never gets to wander. Daydreaming has become rare, even though it's one of the purest forms of creative thinking your brain has. When you allow your mind to drift, the default mode network goes to work, quietly sorting through old memories, new inputs, random thoughts, emotions, and experiences, then stitching them together in ways you never consciously would. That's why a 10-minute break could solve something that 3 hours of focus time could never. So, what's the final takeaway from all of this? Creativity isn't just a gift that some people possess. It's a biological process that your brain is always running. The question is whether you're feeding it the right ingredients, giving it the space to wander, and challenging it enough to grow. Creativity is simply your mind connecting ideas in ways only you can, shaped by your experiences, your curiosity, your memories, and the weird little corners of your brain that no algorithm could predict. Once you understand these mechanics, creativity stops being mysterious. It becomes something you can spark deliberately, a skill you build, a habit you practice, a muscle you train. And the moment you stop waiting for creativity to come to you, you become the one who makes it happen. So start being creative now by giving this video an upwards pointed thumb, and subscribe if this made you at least 1% smarter. Until next time, peace.